Ethan was walking down a familiar street holding his son's hand. Kevin was thinking out loud about something. Ethan mechanically smiled but did not listen to his son. His mind was absorbed by the memories of the days when he himself had asked endless questions to his foster father. When they reached the playground, Ethan sat down on one side of the benches to let his son play with the children, and then he immersed himself in memories. Ethan's parents did not survive the crash when the boy was under 3 years old. He had only his grandmother, but soon she died as well, unable to bear the grief caused by the death of her only daughter. Ethan ended up in an orphanage. He did not stay there long, and soon he was adopted by Iris and Felix. The boy became very attached to his new parents. He loved them and called them Daddy and Mommy. They were wonderful people. It seemed that all the troubles were over. But after a few years, a new misfortune happened. The foster mother died because of an occupational injury, and it became a real tragedy in the family. Ethan once again lost stability under his feet, but he still had his father, whom he adored. But Felix couldn't cope with the grief and started to drink to forget about his loss. After a while, his neighbor, seeing that Felix was going downhill, tried to talk to him. She chose a moment when the man was in a normal condition and said, "You'd better come to your senses, Felix. You have a son growing up, and you don't look after him. You're going to lose the kid. Get wise. Stop drinking. Iris would be horrified if she saw what you've become." But Felix didn't listen to her. He said that he would sort everything out himself and was very rude to the woman. She took offense and went to the guardianship office. A few days later, they took Ethan back to the orphanage. The boy cried terribly when they took him away. Felix frowned and didn't fully realize what was happening. "Son, they'll look after you for a while, and I'll take you away soon. Don't be afraid. Just wait a bit." The boy looked at him with trusting eyes, begging him to come and get him as soon as possible. Felix hugged his son, and soon they took him away. At the orphanage, he sat by the window every day looking out for his father. But the hope in his eyes was fading with each passing day. A week, a month, 6 months passed. But his father didn't come back for him, and Ethan was placed into a family in another city. He lost touch with his past life. And then, just a few months later, Ethan returned to his hometown as an adult male. It was many years later. He already had his own family, a son, and soon he would have a daughter. His second foster parents turned out to be good people too. They loved him and treated him very well. But it still hurt him that Felix never took him back as he had promised. So Ethan decided to return to his hometown to find everything out. When he arrived at his first foster parents' apartment, he did not find anyone there. A woman about Ethan's age, who opened the door of the neighboring apartment, said that once upon a time there was a man who had his son taken away, but then the man got seriously ill. He was diagnosed with cancer. Soon he disappeared. Nobody knew whether he had died or moved away. Ethan realized that his father hadn't come to pick him up due to forced circumstances, and most likely he was no longer in this world, and even his grave could not be found. Suddenly, little Kevin laughed out loud, and Ethan came back to reality. In the meantime, Felix was sitting on a park bench nearby and looked at passerby with a sullen look on his face. People came and went, some just taking a walk, some were hurrying home from work. Everyone had his own life. Sad thoughts overtook the man, and he also sank into memories. He and Iris had no children of their own. No one knew the exact reason, perhaps a banal incompatibility. Anyway, they decided to adopt, and soon they had a 4-year-old boy who had been left without parents by a tragic accident. They immediately loved him, and the boy was growing up in affection and harmony. He became particularly attached to Felix, and he wouldn't leave his side when he was at home. And then a misfortune happened. Iris died. It was criminal negligence at work, and the perpetrators were punished, but that did not make things better for Felix. Not knowing how else to cope with the grief, he began drinking, and it came to the fact that one terrible day his son was taken away by the guardians. Right after that, on top of everything else, he was fired for truancy and drunkenness. One day, Felix was walking through the apartment and crushed Ethan's little car. He was shocked and sobbed for a long time with the realization of what had happened. It was a turning point. Felix stopped drinking, found a job, and was about to take his son back when he suddenly felt so bad he had to go to the hospital, where a few days later he received a distressing diagnosis of cancer. A large sum of money was needed for quality treatment, so Felix sold his apartment to the first buyer and left the city for the capital. He promised himself he would stay alive and come back for Ethan. But the recovery period after surgery dragged on, and when he was able to return, a terrible disappointment awaited him. Ethan had been adopted a few months before. Felix wiped away his tears. Many years had passed since then. The memory of his adopted son still nursed an old wound, and he blamed himself for it every day. Sometimes he silently begged Iris's forgiveness. He was sure she was watching him from heaven. Suddenly, the boy threw a little rubber ball and it rolled at Felix's feet. The child ran up to him and said, "Good afternoon. Can I take my ball? It's under your feet." Felix pushed his feet aside, and the boy took the ball and suddenly saw that the elderly man was crying. "Why are you crying? Did I hit you with the ball? I didn't mean to hurt you." Felix wiped away his tears and replied, "No, it's just the sun. It's shining in my eyes. Besides, it's very hot. If I give you money, can you buy me some water from that stall over there? Unfortunately, my feet hurt a lot." The boy looked at the stall and frowned. "No, my dad won't let me leave the playground. I'd better ask him and he'll buy you water. I'll be right back." Felix didn't have time to say anything as the boy rushed away. Kevin came up to his father and said that the elderly man was sitting on the bench and was very thirsty. "We can buy him some water and ice cream. I think he's very unhappy because he had tears in his eyes. I want to do something nice for him." Ethan smiled and realized what a kind son he was growing up. After buying water and ice cream from the stall, the man handed his son his purchases. The boy ran and Ethan followed. When he came to the bench, his son was already sitting next to the old man and dangling his feet in the air. Ethan greeted and sat down next to Kevin. "You have a very nice son. I'm surprised and touched by his kindness. It's so unusual these days," said the elderly man. And after a few seconds, thoughtfully added, "I once had a son too, only I lost him through my own stupidity." Ethan looked at the man's profile with interest and cautiously asked what happened to his son. "He's alive. I really hope so, except I don't know anything about his fate." Ethan looked at the old man with even more curiosity, and he told him about how he and his wife had adopted a little boy, how due to the tragic death of his wife and his alcoholism, his son was taken away from him, and how he had fallen seriously ill, had been treated for a long time, and had not had time to return for his son, so he had been adopted by another couple. "That's what happens in life sometimes, and that's the pain I have to live with for the rest of my life," the elderly man said sadly, and a silence hung over them. Unable to believe his guess, Ethan could barely find the strength to ask the names of the man's wife and son. His voice sounded muffled and intermittent, but Felix paid no attention to this and answered, "My wife's name was Iris and my son's name was Ethan." "Daddy, is that really you?" whispered Ethan softly. The elderly man turned sharply toward Ethan, gazing intently into his eyes. After a moment, his lips trembled, and he said as quietly as Ethan, "Son, Ethan, it can't be. God finally has heard my prayers." Kevin sat between the elderly man and his father and looked from one to the other curiously. He listened to the adults and could not understand anything, except he and his daddy finally found his grandfather, whom the father often remembered. Ethan and his foster father sat together, hugging, and tears of joy and relief dripped from their eyes.